we're seeing this camera pop up everywhere on YouTube.
Looks like a floating camera is following you around.
It's no voodoo, it's very simple.
You could just keep zooming out until I look like a little tiny person on a little planet.
No, really, I mean like everywhere. It's the Insta360 One X. The results from this camera are amazing. Getting shots you can really not get any other way. But working with the media files can be kind of frustrating. With all the incredible potential of the camera, what's the best way to work with the media files without tearing out your hair? And what exactly does GoPro have to do with this? Most content creators, well, they're not using the One X for VR video. No, instead, they're shooting in 5.7K and then later on, reframing their shots for 1080. That allows you to come up with new framing, focal length, even new camera movement. There are a bunch of ways to do that. If you already own a One X, then you've probably discovered that none of those options are perfect. They all involve some form of compromise. So let's talk about these different options to try to figure out how to get the best from each and when to choose an alternative. Because this is so complicated, I'm going to break it into 4 sections. First, let's talk about the mobile app. Then I'm going to talk about Insta360's desktop solution, Studio for One X. We'll talk about plugins for Adobe. And lastly, let's talk about file conversions. So before I get too granular with all of these 4 different options, it's probably best for me to tell you what I think is the best editing solution for One X Media, my go-to production path. For flexibility and control, download, install, and use GoPro's VR plugins for the Adobe suite. The results are often better than what you get from the One X Studio application, and they work in both After Effects and Premiere. I've included a link in the description down below, and I'll walk you through how to use the plugin in just a minute. But first, I think we should look at Insta360's toolsets, warts and all. So, just a little heads up. It might kind of feel like all I'm doing is ranting about what doesn't work. You see, I get really frustrated with production potholes. If all you want to do is just jump ahead to learn how to use the GoPro plugin, go ahead and just jump here in the video. Skip all this stuff. The easiest and most accessible way to prepare your footage is to use the Insta360 phone app or connect a cable to your phone. Once the media is on your phone, you'll reframe the footage the way you want it and export it as a new MP4 file. One challenge is the app won't let you control compression settings or format when exporting your new file. For me, that's a problem. Here's the rub. My goal in production is, whenever possible, to avoid stepping on my footage with unnecessary compression. Yeah, so? Well, this camera creates source files in a proprietary format. These .insv files are essentially a modified MP4 topping out at 120 megabits per second. Not great, not awful, but it's still an MP4 file. That means it's compressed. But when I take this source footage, bring it into my phone, modify it in the app, make it all pretty, and export it, I'll be creating a new, even more compressed MP4 file using that already compressed source footage. But wait, we're not done, because I plan to use this new file as a source during editing. That means eventually it's going to get compressed one more time when I output my final video. That's at least 3 rounds of compression, some with little or no control over codec or bitrate. Remember, every time you compress a file, you are, by definition, throwing away some of the original information. If you're not careful, your crisp footage will start looking soft and mushy. The limitations with exporting doesn't mean you abandon the mobile app, especially since some functions like motion blur on hyperlapse or slow-mo aren't available anywhere else. What it really means is asking yourself the question, can I accomplish what I'm trying to accomplish using the original file in editing? If the answer is yes, then I'm skipping my phone. If the answer is no because of something like motion blur, well, then I'm using the app. A second production path is using the Insta360 Studio desktop application, designed for working with One X media. The good news is this app gets updated about once a month. But I'm a PC guy, and that means unfortunately I can't really speak to the Mac experience. But as far as PCs go, Insta360's latest release of their studio software, February 2019, well, it's less than great. I mean, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love this camera. I'm not in love with their software. I've got a fairly tricked out Surface Book. I can edit 4K without a lot of difficulty. But forget trying to run the most recent update. The software is unstable, it freezes, it crashes, media won't play smoothly, if at all. And like the phone, you still have to recompress files for output. The experience with my desktop computer is better, mostly because it's a custom-made, enterprise-level beast designed for 6K editing. I'm thinking most folks just don't have that kind of horsepower available. Additionally, the studio software is missing many of the best functions you find on the mobile app. No slow-mo, no motion blur for hyperlapse, limited functionality with the bullet effect. One positive is, depending upon what type of media you're exporting, you have more control over the process. With Reframe 1080, you can set your bitrate up to 99 megabits per second. With bullet effect media, you have even more control. And conforming and exporting source footage gives you the most control of all. But you're stuck with the MP4 format. No ProRes, no MXF, no quality codecs. I'm guessing being limited to MP4 is a licensing issue. Insta360 would probably have to pay patent holders in order to get access to any of the professional codecs. That's why I just skip their applications entirely and bring my footage directly into editing. I'd love to show you the Insta360 One X Adobe Plug-in. They promise on the website an experience that will allow us to seamlessly reframe and use the footage as source media, like magic. They advertise it as if it already exists, but I'm not finding it, even after repeated installations of the One X Studio desktop app. That's why I just gave up and went to a plugin that works, GoPro. As I said off the top, download, install, and use GoPro's VR plugins for the Adobe Suite. You won't get motion blur on hyperlapse. I still use the mobile app for that. But with this plugin, I have better results with my framing. I have more control over the fluidity of the motion between my keyframes, better color correction. Heck, I even get better results with bullet time effect. That said, let's just jump in and let me walk you through this process. So as you can see, I've got some media loaded into Premiere Pro. I've got a shot walking down the street, my arm out, into planet mode, really straightforward, something you might be able to do in the app, but I'm doing it here. Let me show you how we go through this. So here's my shot, drop it into my timeline, and as you can see, just straightforward. Here in Video Effects is the GoPro VR Reframe plugin. I'm going to drop it on my timeline, and that's going to open up a number of controls. You'll see that we have field of view, which allows you to adjust your framing. We've got yaw, which allows us to go around, pitch, which is up and down, and roll, which allows us to adjust the horizon or get funky, whatever we want to do. Reset these, and let's come up with a move. So let's say we want to tilt down a little, and I'm walking like a weird guy with my arms straight out. This is where we want to start the shot. And about here, I'm going to want to begin to change the framing, my camera size, all of those sorts of things. So I've established keyframes. This is the start of the move. Go forward, let's say about here. We're going to change the field of view. Oh, we'll do this, that's not bad. Maybe we'll change it a little less building, a little more tree. Just change the pitch a little. So as you see between these keyframes, it just zooms out. We'll hold it for a moment. And there you can see I'm starting to bring the camera down. So let's go back here, and about here we'll establish keyframes for the start of the next move. I'm going to slide this keyframe up since I have not changed the roll, and I don't know if I'm going to need to change the roll going forward, but we're definitely going to want to change all of these. And now it's here, so let's change the framing. That looks okay. Let's tilt up. Horizon looks like it's rolling a little, so let's go here and tilt up a little more. So now we have a move from here to here. And these moves are interesting but awfully rough. And that's where we can begin to manage our keyframes. I'll select the start of these, and I'm going to ease out. Grab these guys, and I'm going to ease in. Same with these. Ease out, and ease in. So this will smooth it out a little. A little better. But I can go through and, opening these up, start managing. I'm going to zoom in a little so I can see these guys. Start managing the acceleration. If I touch here, I can adjust this so that we get a little more fluid acceleration on these curves. And now this effect has a slow and then snap and then slow, and we're getting something that's beginning to feel a little bit more organic. Opening up our ability to manage the velocity and the Bezier properties of each of these keyframes really makes it much easier to come up with effects that either look organic or dynamic, however you may want to manage them. So that's the basics of using the GoPro VR reframe. So let's jump over and let's look at bullet time and how I like to use the plugin with bullet time. I think it gives us a lot more control. Here I've got a shot. You can see it's the source rather than scrubbing through. And this doesn't have the plugin in it, and the framing's a little funky. It's just not exactly what I had in mind. I can drop the reframe plugin on. You can see I'm using the strap rather than the pole. And I think I would like to be looking down on us more, so I can change the pitch and start this looking down on us. And at this point, let's change our framing and let's go up. And not only up, let's go out a little. So now we have bullet time being able to go, here we are, we're looking down, and then tilt up and reframing. Some really dynamic. Again, we can go in and ease in, ease out, and that will help us with the fluidity of the effect. Another reason why I prefer to bring my source footage directly into Premiere is it gives me greater control over my color correction. So on the Insta One X, I shoot in log, which gives you a very flat sort of meh picture designed to be able to pop the colors. So let me walk you through how I use Insta360's LUT to be able to bring the colors and make them a little bit more alive. So as you can see here, I've brought up a file. You can see it's really rather flat and not great looking. when I shoot, I tend to most often use a reference chart. I've got a little pocket reference chart. Just something white will do, but this gives me something that's consistent that I can work from. And because of that, I've got my white color, and I can go through and sample it, and you can see that nothing changed as I expected. The color was correct, but now I want to change the LUT. And if I go in here, there's no LUT. That means I need to install the LUT into Premiere. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. Here is a folder, and I have downloaded this One X LUT, and I got this from Insta360's website. And so here on the One X, we've got camera control, camera firmware, and in 360 editing software, we have the LUT. And you can download this LUT, open it up, and then install it directly into Premiere. If you have questions about where that LUT goes, let me show you. So here is the One X LUT. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to work my way over into, I'm on a PC, so Program Files, Adobe, Premiere Pro, Lumetri, let's call the whole thing off. Here is LUTs. And we've got these three options: creative, legacy, technical. I find the best luck by placing it in technical. And now I have this LUT in the technical folder of LUTs and in the color correction. But I need to copy that LUT more than just into Premiere. Because when I go to encode, if I use a media encoder, it needs to have the LUT. And if I move this footage over to After Effects, it needs to have the LUT. So you need to make certain that you have also copied that LUT into, here's media encoder, LUTs, technical, and After Effects, LUTs, technical. Now I've got that LUT in the three places where I'm most likely to leverage my 360 footage, and I won't jump into the application and go, oh, wait a minute, why isn't this working? You need to, it'd be nice if you could just do it once and it worked, but unfortunately, no. Now that I've dropped that LUT, I need to restart Premiere so that when it fires up, it reinitializes and looks in that folder and knows it has it available. Launch it here real fast. And there we go. So now when we go here, LUT, there is the One X final version 1, and I can put it on input LUT, and boom, color has changed significantly. So let me toggle it off. None. Toggle it back on. And so now we've got a basic correction that's in much better shape, is really going to afford us something that's easier to color correct. I can go through and kill the highlights because it's a bright sunny day. I would go through and fiddle with it in greater detail, but you get the idea. And I can still go through and in video effects, reframe, and I've still got all of the control functions with the reframe that we would normally have, and that doesn't interfere with the LUT. So this is, for me, a way that I have a lot more control over the final results of my footage. So if you've looked closely in my timeline, you may notice that some of my files have the extension insv, and some of them have the extension MOV. What's going on there? Well, as I indicated off the top, the insv file format is basically an MP4 format. And if you've worked much with MP4s in editing, one of the things you may have discovered is that it can really put a load on your computer. It can really tax it to try to display the image. Without getting too technical, it's something called LongGOP, group of pictures. And the way that MP4s work is it has a keyframe where all of the information is there. And then over the next 17 frames, the only information that's in that frame is what's different from the previous frame. So if the first frame is a woman talking and she's against a white background, essentially the only information that will be in the next 17 frames are her lips and her eyes, because the background really isn't changing. And after 18 frames, it does a whole new refresh and goes forward. Well, that's great if you're playing forward. That's really what it was designed for. First frame, change, change, change. But in editing, when you scroll backwards, as you start going back one frame at a time, it has to jump to that keyframe, recompile, jump to the keyframe, recompile, and it's a tremendous amount of processing, and it's really hard on the computer. That's why working with MP4 files and editing can really put a lot of stress and strain on your computer. There are a lot of formats that aren't LongGOP. One of them is ProRes. MXF files aren't, uncompressed AVIs. These are big hunkin' files. But the computer doesn't have to work so hard as you're scrolling, scrubbing, moving one frame at a time. And you end up with a much better editing experience. The pictures play more smoothly. If you're on an underpowered computer trying to scrub through MP4s, literally the entire application can just crash. It runs out of memory, it just gets overloaded, and it goes, I'm done, I'm taking a break. So that's why I try to not work with MP4 files as much as possible. So I take the insv files and flip them into ProRes files. Wait a minute, isn't that compression? No. I take the insv files, which are maxing out at about 120 megabits, and in Media Encoder, I convert them into ProRes 422, high quality ProRes 422 files. I have a higher bit rate, a bigger file, and so I'm not compressing the file, I'm just flipping it. I can't make the quality better, but I can make the experience of working with those files and editing much better. It's a smoother, better experience. And that's why when you look in my project, what you'll see is I may have a folder of raw footage. I may have footage that is coming out in ProRes. And even the 1080 ProRes is footage that originally was MP4 from the mobile app. And I have taken that and flipped it into 1080 ProRes files. These are full raster files. And as we look at the canvas size here, you'll see 5760, 2880. This is an exact copy, except it's now every frame has all of the information. The encoder compiled it all so I can scrub it and use it. This is going to occupy a lot more media on your hard drive. The data footprint is going to be better, but your editing experience is going to be exponentially better. Unfortunately, I've yet to figure out a way to make it work with bullet time media. The bullet time footage is shot at 120 frames per second, and I have yet to figure out how to get a ProRes encode out of Media Encoder at more than 100 frames per second. If any of you guys can figure it out, please let me know. I'd love to be able to ramp the speed up so that the file that I flip in Media Encoder is at the same frame rate as what we're capturing in the camera. So I still work with all of my bullet time media in the insv file format. There's not a lot of it, it's only occasional, so it's not a deal breaker, but I find that for all of the other media that I'm working with, the stuff that's just at essentially 30 frames per second, it works swimmingly, and it really cuts down on the number of crashes and problems that I have in editing and working with this footage. Converting this footage into ProRes isn't that hard. It does take a little bit of time, and depending upon the processor of your computer and how much footage you have, you might need to plan ahead in order to do that. But let's open up Media Encoder, and you'll see that I've got a couple of source files in here, and it defaulted to MP4. So let's click here and change it over. and we're going to make it a QuickTime, and we'll adjust it to ProRes HQ, and OK. And it's as simple as that, and we can then start encoding it, and it's just going to plug ahead. So it still gives you the opportunity to use your LUTs, all of those sorts of things. It just works out really, really well. Well, I've thrown a lot at you. I know this is exceedingly long, and if you're still here, I'm shocked, frankly. But hopefully this is helpful. It gives you some options, allows you to have more control over what your production path is going to be, and hopefully get the best you can out of this footage, out of this content. If you have questions, just leave them in the comments, or maybe advice or ideas for how to improve the production path even more. This is my trial and error. This is what I've been doing for the last few months with this camera. Hopefully Insta360 updates their software and makes their tool set more robust. Until then, we've at least got solutions for getting great footage and having a lot of control to tell the kinds of stories that all of us want to tell. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd really appreciate it if you did. Please hit the like button, hit the bell. That'll help you get notifications next time I publish something. And until then, go out, make great stories, shoot some great shots, and let me know what you've done with the camera. Have you noticed that camera names just keep getting longer? I mean, Insta360 One X, that's a mouthful. Why couldn't they just name it like Sue or something?